What is up, everybody? This is Chase, and welcome back to the Wellness Center podcast. I am so excited to be with everyone today. Guys, thank you for coming in and joining me. Thank you for being a part of the Wellness Center tribe. I want you to know that if you're not already, please make sure to like and subscribe to whatever channel you are listening to this on, so that way we can continually grow the tribe, so we can share this beautiful lessons and stories of resilience, one filming at a time. Guys, my guest today, she is a freaking rock star. Seriously, some of the things that she's had to experience in her life, some of the lessons that she's learned have turned her into a truly phenomenal woman. And I am so blessed and fortunate that I get to have her on my show today. So everyone, without further ado, actually, one more thing I want to tell each and every one of you as you're listening to this show, I actually invite you to be thinking of someone that could use the lessons taught by my wonderful guest today, and I invite you to share it with them. Please do so. It's going to bless their lives. It's going to bless your life. It's going to make everyone better. So without further ado, I'm going to bring on my wonderful guest today. So my wonderful guest, by way of introduction, she is a life coach and claims to be a U.S. nomad undergoing another cross-country move. She's experienced a midlife crisis in her 30s, which reshaped her perspective on life's priorities. She specializes in teaching self-validation to women in their midlives. She empowers women to confidently navigate relationships and personal growth, and she's an advocate for embracing change and uncertainty as opportunities for growth. So without further ado, we have Christina Smith on the show. Christina, how are you doing today?
I am feeling awesome, especially after that awesome introduction.
Awesome. Well, no, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy life. I can imagine being in the process of a move, taking some time to come to come to a podcast. I really am grateful for you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I really enjoy your other episodes, so I'm looking forward to this.
Hey, thank you so much. It's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to have a great conversation. So, Christina, just so I and the viewers can get to know you a little bit better, will you please share some cookie cutter answers with us as to who you are?
Sure, sure. Who am I? I am a life coach for midlife women, specifically is what I focus on. Not that men and other phases of our lives don't need coaches, but it's the one space that I live in because I know how transformational that stage can be for women, especially because I feel like we spend the first half of our lives really doing what we think we should rather than what we actually want to do. And in fact, no one really asks you, what do you want to do? They really are like, what are you going to be when you grow up, right? And we identify that with some kind of identity, usually a working identity, or I'm going to be a mom, or I'm going to be a wife, or we relate to who we are going to be by who's around us, especially as women. And so I really love this space. And I was really given very little tools growing up. In fact, somebody asked me, what would your 20-year-old self say about you today? And I was just thinking, she would be like, no way, no way. That can't be what you do with your life. Like, how would we even get there? So I just think that when we talk about the journey, it's just so amazing how it can be so much more than we even expect it to be. So yes, so I am a nomad. I move all over, and that's basically how my life has been. As I'm getting older, I am getting looking forward to the time where I settle down into a space. But yeah, I had a really rough childhood, and I had to learn a lot of things, mental health things that, if the wellness center was around back then, I probably would have been a lot better off understanding that these are things that a lot of people go through. And it's like all these bumps that feel really hard are actually quite normal. And, getting through them, it's not always happy and positivity and gratitude. There's a lot more to it. So, yeah, that's who I am, I think.
What a powerful introduction. Holy moly. Thank you so much, Christina. That has already given us, as people so much just to love you and to understand your upbringing. Thank you so much. And kind of those last few comments you made about life was rough. I think that segues perfectly into my first question. So, Christina, please take us back to a young Christina Smith. When were
Mm.
some of the first times that you noticed you were struggling with your mental health?
Whew. Wow. I think it was hard for me to actually recognize it because I just thought that it was part of who I was, but always asking myself, I was asked a lot when I was younger. I think, maybe it's my generation, Gen X, but we were pretty much expected to learn how to grow up on our own. We were latchkey kids at 5 or 6, which today we would call neglect and abuse. But we really learned things on our own. So I don't think I ever knew that there was like a mental health thing because my mom, therapists weren't really a thing unless there was something major going on, like you were suicidal or something, or if she knew that I was suicidal, she may have changed that. But I was sexually abused when I was young. So there was like a lot of little things that added up that now, like in my 20s, when I look back, I was like, wow, how did I not see that there was a lot of mental health problems? But I just really thought there was something wrong with me and not necessarily like a mental health issue, just like I was inappropriate. All the things that we tell ourselves, but in a much stronger sense. And then there was also a lot of physical abuse, and our home life was terrible. And I don't think I could figure out why it was terrible, except that when you walked into that home life, there was like a tension of anger always in our house and a lot of people fighting all the time. And I didn't know that that wasn't normal, except that I would go over to my friends' houses and I would think, oh, well, they must just be putting on a good show. I mean, everybody's house has got to be as abusive as mine. And then in my 20s, I started going to therapy and I looked back and I saw how dysfunctional the family life was. And even then, like I denied a lot of it. Like I talked about my sexual abuse, but not a lot. And I was like, oh no, it's understandable. I know it happened. Like this person wasn't well, that person didn't know better. And my therapist was just like, it's a little deeper than that. You can't just tell me that this hasn't impacted you. And it wasn't really until my 30s where I started realizing like how all of the abuse and things that had happened to me had really impacted the way that I was showing up. I was really good at self-sabotaging. I was probably really into the manic depressive because, it was always very high or very low. There was like no in between. And I couldn't figure out how I could get myself to regulate into the in between and how I could have a less drama filled life. And that was really a struggle. I didn't realize all of that had to do with my mental wellness, though. I thought, I'm just making bad choices or bad things just happen to me. I grew up in a Catholic house, so when bad things happened to me, it was pretty much my fault. God was punishing me for something that I had done. So that contributed a lot to my mental illness, I guess. My mental disease was thinking that all the bad things that happened to me, I actually deserved, rather than just being taught to focus on how do we get through them and just accept that bumps in life are going to happen. Um, but when we start blaming ourselves for all the bad things that could possibly happen, even though we have no impact on, acts of God or whatever, that is really what took my energy down. And it's why I never discussed my sexual abuse with my parents until I was in my 30s, because I pretty much thought that my mom would just tell me it was my fault, that it happened. So yeah, so I think for a lot of us, we don't really understand that there's like mental illness or disease going on, and we just think it's normal. It's like not having glasses, right? Never having gone to a eye doctor. You don't understand that the world is fuzzy. It's just the way it's always been. And then when you put that first pair of glasses on, you're like, whoa. Seeing it in a whole different light was amazing. And unfortunately, that didn't happen until my 30s, that I saw that wow, there is a lot of stuff like PTSD and things that have been all mixed up that I didn't realize. And I had to start peeling apart like what part of me is making this choice out of this not being well versus this is really what I want.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing. That was so incredibly vulnerable. And you shared so much beautiful knowledge there and so many lessons that I know people are going to connect to. Thank you so much for
Mm,
your vulnerability and your honesty. I can tell that you've worked through a lot of this stuff
mm,
just by the way you talk about it. So thank you. I would love to dive a little bit deeper into some things that came to mind. So this energy of anger that you talked about
mm.
in your parents' home, where do you think that started and stemmed from?
Whew. Well, they say that the matriarch can be the head of the family, right? I mean, even though we look at it in my house, the matriarch, my mother was definitely the head. And I think that she had gone through I mean, her childhood was worse than mine. Not that we're comparing, but it was a little bit more abusive than even mine. And she worked really hard. I think she was just really exhausted. And when my stepfather came in, it became like a battle of the daughters. So he had a daughter and she had me. And it was like whose daughter is best rather than like really looking at it from a functional family way of being like, how do we all get along? How do we spend time together in good ways? And it was just, it was very messy. My mom worked nights, my stepfather worked days, so they hardly ever saw each other. So we really didn't have like a real true family unit. And because of that, and because of all the competition within the family, it just was always felt like it always felt like I always remember like when I was feeling joyful, I would like put on my mask before I went in the house because if I didn't, somebody was bound to steal that joy from me. Tell me why I shouldn't be joyful. Tell me why I shouldn't be proud of myself or whatever the thing was. I always had this feeling that somebody was going to steal my joy from me. And
Yeah.
so I would have to put that mask on just to go in the house. So yeah, I think it was just a lot of it's generational. It's all, when you start with dysfunction, you're breeding dysfunctional children. They don't know what functional families look like, and it goes on and on and on until somebody says, hold on, I don't want to live like this. And I think that that's where I was in my life, was like, I don't want to have a home that I don't want to go home to.
That makes a lot of sense. And
Yeah.
thank you for sharing. I know people are resonating with this because I am, right?
Mhm.
I hear these stories and I just think I'm like, wow, it's when I was your age, when we were younger, right? If we would have just known, right?
Mm.
There's so much that could have been changed. Um, s- the self-sabotage you said that you did, when you were younger that you weren't aware of, how were you self-sabotaging yourself and what did that look like?
Oof. I just did a life review, and if you're in your 40s or 50s and you haven't done one, I completely tell you that you should go do one. And what I found looking at like my social life in my teens and my 20s was I was like the red flag collector. Like if you had red flags around you, you were my friend. You were the person I was going to date. Like that was definitely the person for me. So there was like a part of me that was looking for that dysfunction, even though because it almost felt normal and comfortable. Like the drama felt normal and comfortable to me. So I was finding all of these people to put in my inner circle that were not the best quality, definitely not long-term partners for myself. I was also, searching because in a house full of anger, there's not a lot of love. And so I was constantly looking for someone to love me and looking for that external validation that I never got. So I would make some very interesting choices to get that self-validation rather than really standing with this doesn't feel right. This shouldn't be a thing. And so I would really dive into making trouble for myself. Like, this isn't gonna work. Oh, that's for me.
I think we all have those places in our lives where you're like, you know what, I need some validation, I need love. And
Mhm.
so I think a lot of people can resonate with that. So thank you, Christina, for sharing. And I know you were talking a little while ago about you get to this point in your life, for you it was in your 30s where you were like, man, I don't want to live like this anymore.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
I think that goes perfectly into my next question, which is the heroine's journey. And for those listening, The heroine's journey or the hero's journey is essentially a point in your life where you realize you have to go through an extreme transformation or trial or journey, so and ultimately come out of it better, maybe scathed but better. So
Mm.
Christina, will you please describe for us the heroine's journey you had to undertake?
Yeah. So as I was collecting red flags in my 20s, I got married to one of those red flags. And we had a child, and I tried really, really hard to stay in this marriage. And I was okay with dysfunction because that was my normal. So I was like, okay, this will be dysfunctional. I don't really love this man, but I really want my son to have both parents. So I kept trying and trying this really dysfunctional relationship. And then finally, when we divorced, it was like 5 years of me being really effing angry all the time. 5 years. My friends said I was a man hater. I was not. I was just very, very angry. And, a lot of it was anger at myself. I kept going back to this person that I knew wasn't right for me, that I knew wasn't going to bring me what I wanted. But I was so used to settling that I was like, surely I can settle. Surely I can settle. So after 5 years of anger, I started going to therapy. I also found an amazing man that I got remarried to. And I had a healthy kid. We had a house. We had checked all the boxes that my mom said, you'll be happy when. You'll be happy when you go to college and you get the job and you have the house and the promotion and the husband, and that you'll be happy then. Well, all the boxes checked. I'm sitting there in my mid 30s, and I have never been more depressed than I had ever been like before. And I couldn't understand why. And every day I tried to use positivity and gratitude to make myself feel better. And so what happened is I cried on the way to work for a year, and just constantly telling myself, Christina, you should be grateful. This is better than the life that you had when you were young, when you like going home, like that's a big thing in my life, in my world. You like going home, like you like the energy in your house. Like, what is wrong with you that you can't just be grateful? And yet I couldn't. Every day I was crying and I couldn't figure out why. And after about a year, I thought, maybe this isn't normal. Maybe, maybe there's another way to live. So I went back to therapy and I started sitting in women's circles. And I started getting involved in an organization called Woman Within. And it was really helping me to understand myself more, that I had basically followed someone else's formula. My mother really thought that if she had gone to college and gotten the job and had the benefits and done all the things in the right order, that life would be great. And yet I had done all those things and life was not great. It might have been great for her, right? But it wasn't my life. And that's when I had to start thinking, well, what is it that I need to be different? And I mean, luckily, fortunately, unfortunately, at the same time, I started getting really ill. I had lots of gut issues. And I would have an inflammation problem, and then I would be in bed for 2 months working from bed. And it would be so frustrating because I was really raised a warrior. So it was like, I have to work from bed, which was just making me even more sick because of the stress on my body of like feeling like I had to do things while it was trying to heal. Um, and so I started going to health coaching school just to figure out my own problems because doctors weren't helping. And that's when I started looking at coaching. So that was really that moment of a year, a moment. I love how we are like this transformational journey. There's this one moment where it changes. Sometimes that's actually a longer moment, right? Like it took me an entire year to recognize, hold on, I'm not going to live the rest of my life crying on the way to work. Like that just seems ridiculous and wasteful. And there's got to be something else that this anger and this sadness and the shame is trying to bring up for me. So luckily in therapy, I worked through a lot of that stuff and realized that I had to create my own life, which was really hard. And when I became a coach, you know, my mom didn't understand that. Working for yourself, like, is that even a real job? That's not even therapy. That's a coach. Like, what is that? So, like, for the next 6 years, she was sending me unemployment ad or employment ads to get a job, get a job, get a job, even though I kept telling her this was my path. So part of my path was also being able to stand up to other people and like really stand in my own and say, no, this is who I am. And it's even today, it's very strange. Like somebody called me a healer the other day. They were like, "Oh, you're such a huge healer in our community." And I was just like, "Healer? Like that's ooh, that feels big, right? Like that feels bigger than I thought." So it's amazing how much my life has changed. Like I said, at 20, to tell my 20-year-old self that I was going to be a life coach, she would have been like, "You are crazy. I don't even know what that means." Like, you're going to help people. You're self-sabotaging. You're picking up red flags everywhere. Like, but the thing is, like, my journey was so hard because it landed me exactly where I needed to be. And that's what I really feel like today is like, I needed all of that. And am I proud of myself that I got through my college degree and I did all those things? Of course I am. And that, I guess, my message here is when strong feelings are coming up, you don't have to like burn everything in your life. You can really just start looking at the pieces of it and starting to understand which pieces are the Christina I thought I should be versus the Christina that my potential is calling me to be. Because those are often two different things. I was given, two choices when I was younger because I had really great grades all the time. My mom was like, you could be a doctor or you could be a lawyer. And that was like it. And I really thought that I had to be one of those to be happy. And then when I was just about to go into law school, I was like, this isn't for me. I don't want to study law for 3 years and then go practice law. Like, that's not what I wanted to do. I knew that. So I didn't go to law school. And then I got into this midlife kind of crisis, and it was so beautiful. Like, I'm really so grateful for it now. And it was the hardest thing I ever went through. Being ungrateful with a life that provided me what I needed was very strange.
So powerful. So powerful and so cool. Thank you for sure. I love your storytelling ability.
Oh, thank
It's so nice to give a question to a guest and just let them go with it. It's awesome. So thank you for that.
you.
And so what did it look like for you, you know, on like the day-to-day basis? I know you say you talked about like crying as you went to work,
Mhm.
but what were those thoughts and beliefs and patterns that you were living in on the day-to-day basis with this husband that you loved and this healthy child in this home? What were some of those patterns that were making you miserable?
Yeah, well, perfectionism and people pleasing were two of them by far. Is like everything I did, I was taught that you have to give 110% to everything. I call bullshit on that. Complete bullshit. Like, I don't have to put 110% into my dishes. I could, run the dishwasher twice if I really needed to. Like, we get to make choices. And I think that that's what really changed, and the people pleasing. When we are busy pleasing other people, we never once think about what it is that we actually need or want. We might in the moment grab little greedy things for ourselves, but we don't actually look at the who am I as a whole and what is it that I need. Instead, there's this external validation that we are searching for. Like, if I do enough to please you, then you're going to be able to tell me that I'm awesome. And somehow I'm going to just magically believe it. And that's not really how it works. So there was like a lot of people pleasing and perfectionism. And there was just really me putting on a lot of masks every day, which felt really gross, like putting on the positivity mask, just smile. And I got to tell you, that whole phrase, fake it till you make it, I cannot do that. I am so not good at that. Like, I am so not good at faking it. I can face it till I make it maybe, but I can't fake it. Like putting a smile on when I want to cry or scream is just, you'll, if you know me, you'll know that that's never going to be me. I'm going to tell you exactly how I'm feeling. And that's okay though. I think that that's the problem is I had to learn how to feel my feelings without reacting from them, because feelings were really scary to me, but nobody ever taught me how to manage them. And when I learned that you can actually be angry without violence or aggression being attached to it, I was shocked and amazed. And I was like, oh, you mean I can just say that I'm angry, or I can go to like a rage cage and smash some things and like get over it without my anger harming people, right? Without my anger harming myself, really. I can actually feel grief. I can feel shame and get through it rather than trying to pretend it's not there. And I think that's what I was doing for a long time because, again, Gen X, we were told feelings aren't important. It doesn't matter if you're sad or angry, just put your big girl pants on and let's go. We have things to do, right? And that is so the wrong way to deal with feelings. And so it was like a huge portion of it was just learning how to deal with my feelings, especially all that anger that had built up during my home life and during my first marriage. Managing that anger and learning how to get through it and what the anger was saying to me was a huge piece of my healing. So if feelings are something that somebody out there is like, why won't these go away? Because you're not listening to them. You're trying to cover them with positivity and gratitude. And although I love positivity, I love gratitude, there are times where they're just not appropriate, that we really need to be able to feel what we're going through, or else we don't learn from it and we don't move forward in a way that feels good. We just keep hitting our head on the same wall. It'll just keep coming at us and we'll try to deny it. And I think it's like Eckhart Tolle who says, whatever we resist persists. So the more I try to ignore or deny something, the more it's just going to keep popping up in my life. Like it's like bop-a-mole, like, it'll show up at work, it'll show up in my marriage, it'll show up in my friendships.
I love that. So my wife, she's a trauma informed yoga instructor, and
Mhm.
this morning she was walking me through a flow that she's going to be doing here in the next few weeks with a group. And one of the poems that she shared with me was very similar to the what resists persists. It was what you turn away from chases you, what you turn to changes you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's beautiful. That's perfect. I'm gonna have
Yeah.
to write that down when I listen to this podcast. Because yeah, that's beautiful. That's exactly what happens. It just, like I love when people are like, I just tell my inner critic to shut up. I'm like, I don't know how that works for you, because that ain't never worked for me. Ain't never worked for me. Like I have to listen to her and love her and just I like to see her as like this old granny that just really wants to like put me in a rubber room, wrap me up with bubble wrap. Like she just wants me to be safe. And so she's really crotchety about a lot of things and she's really cranky and wants to tell me all the risks that could possibly happen. But I get to choose whether or not I'm going to believe in all that stuff or, you know, I always tell my clients to what's the difference between safety and discomfort? If it's a safety issue, yes, absolutely take care of that. But unfortunately, in our lives today, there's not a lot of huge safety issues. Like there are some, I'm not trying to, but it's not every day we were running from a tiger or a bear, right? And that's what our brain is looking for, those real safety issues. And since we don't have a lot of those real safety issues to look at anymore, it says, well, anything that takes us out of comfort is really bad for us. And that's not true. Like we know that growth only comes from uncomfortable spots, mostly comes from uncomfortable spots. I'd love it to come from my joyous spots, but unfortunately, most of my growth comes from being really uncomfortable, being in anger, being in sadness and shame, and turning away from that. It's going to get louder and it's going to start screaming at me in other ways and be like, hey, I'm still here. I'm still here. No matter how much gratitude list you write, no matter how many silver linings you look at, it's still there, And so we do have to work through it. Unfortunately, there's no cheat to this. I mean, we try and it just keeps knocking at the door.
Yeah, absolutely. Amen to that. And again, I think when you talk about facing it, that's going to lead perfectly into my next question, which is the coping skills that I
Mhm.
love when my guests come on and share with. So as you're learning to face it, what were some of the coping skills that you developed and how did they evolve
Mhm.
over time?
Well, one of them was getting support. I mean, and that was hard for me because, again, Gen Xers, we're not used to being codependent or needing support or getting help or asking for what we want. We really like to just do it ourselves. And unfortunately, I had no skills for that. I had no experience of how to manage my feelings. So I did read a lot of books. I read the Eckhart Tolle, A New Earth, I believe is the book that he wrote, Awakening to Your Life's Purpose. That changed my whole perspective on feelings and how we see things and perspectives. And he talks about pain bodies. Like, it was amazing to go through that and start just opening up and being like, wow, there are other ways of seeing things, that this could be like a mental health issue, that I was trained to see things in a very skewed perspective. So learning that there's other ways to look at things was a huge thing. Coping skills, let's see, what else did I do? I had to start asking myself what I wanted. I think it was like 37 before a therapist was like, hey, but what do you want for you? And I'm like, well, I want to be a good wife and I want to be a good mom. And no, 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 she said, what is it that you want to be for you? Like, for you as just Christina, not attached to anything else, but just for you, what is it that you want? And that stumped me for probably a couple of years. I had to start diving in and going, who really am I? What is really important to me? So, coping skills is, first of all, go get some support somehow, go ask for help, share what you're feeling. I sat in a lot of women's circles, which was not only powerful because I got seen and heard for who I am, but because I got to see other women in their pain and in their vulnerability. And I started to realize, like, oh, we're all going through this human thing. This human thing impacts all of us, like in different ways, obviously, but we all go through this hard stuff. So, learning to sit in women's circles and really give myself that time, giving myself permission to say, today I'm not going to be the greatest wife or mom. I'm actually going to take time for myself to go do whatever I need to do for myself. Learning to self validate instead of asking everybody else what they thought about my choices, starting to be able to um, step into tools and create tools for other women, that we can start learning how to uncover who we are and validate ourselves by what's most important to us, and being able to do that at any time. That was what was so important to me, was coming up with tools that I could share with other people. Sometimes coping is teaching. I know for me it is. Like, I can go through and do something that really scares me if I'm showing somebody else how to do it.
I call that my bootleg therapist
Yeah.
mask that I put on, where like I feel so much better embracing hard things, like you're saying, when I'm showing someone else. I
Yeah.
totally resonate with that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
cool. So a couple questions for you about
Mhm.
some of these coping skills, and thank you for
Yeah.
sharing them so far. So you talked about how you had to change your perspective in a lot of
Mhm.
different ways. What were some of the things that you did to change your perspective? What are some, maybe the mantras you did, the words
Mm.
you wrote? What did that look like for you?
Changing my perspective. I got this really great question from a corporate trainer when I was in the corporate world, which was, what if the opposite is true? And that had me starting to, like, I still use that today, even though he was talking about sales and selling something to someone. But it's really true in life. Like, what if the opposite is true? Because so often we can go down to that worst case scenario of what could happen. Like, if you're writing a book and you're like, well, why should I write a book? What if it doesn't help anybody? What if it's just crap? And then Well, what if the opposite is true? What if it actually helps somebody? What if somebody's life depends on you writing this book because it's really going to show them something that they need in their life? What if that happens, right? And we don't do that enough. We always go down the worst case scenario, but we often don't go through the best case scenario. What could that be? And usually the truth is somewhere in between, right? I mean, it's never usually the best or the worst, but it's somewhere in between. And being able to ask ourselves that question. And the other one that I already mentioned is this unsafe or is this uncomfortable? If it's uncomfortable, I can get a little bit of courage and keep moving through, right? Because courage is fear walking. Um, but if it's unsafe, I can take care of that too. So those are two questions that I always start with because they like at least bring my nervous system down. Like, okay, this is just uncomfortable. We're used to, being uncomfortable, and that's okay. We can get through this. It's not a safety issue. Um, and so that's one way that I do that. The other thing is I have a whole method called the intentional aligned method where we get to the gist of how we want to feel. And if we show up that way every day, then we can self-validate. And I can go, well, I couldn't control everything, but the things that I could control, I did. So, for instance, some people use like a word of the year. Well, I have an actual process of coming up with those words for the year, like of what is actually not just picking one willy-nilly out of the air. But I have a whole process of how we truly get to get aligned to what we truly want. And those are usually feelings. Like if you take a vision board, we put that, I'm sure we've all done 100 vision boards or so. Um, if we look at that vision board, everything on that vision board is there because we think that when we get that thing or when we get there, that we're going to feel a certain way. Well, what if that feeling was just the goal instead of the big house or the happy kids or the whatever? What if that feeling was our guiding light every day? So for instance, this year my words are bold, open, and love. So as long as I show up to this podcast feeling, with boldness and openness and love, then I am successful. Even if all of the technology fails, even if I don't like the way that it comes out at the end, even if, I don't know, my internet connection should just disappear and this all gets messed up, right? I can still self-validate and say, well, I showed up with bold, open, and love. That's really all I control, right? So coping skills, when we talk about that, it comes back to what do I control? Which I think is, we try to control things that we don't control, that we don't actually control. And so me, I self-validate off of the things that I actually control. Did I show up the way that I wanted to? Because if we want happy when we get there, we have to kind of bring it with us. So I have to bring bold, open, and love with me. And then and you know what it's like. If you're looking for happy things, you're going to see happy things. If you're looking for miserable things, you're going to see miserable things. So I get to see more bold, open, and love things in my life because that's what I'm looking for and that's what I'm putting out. So that helps me stay really focused on what I truly want. And instead of all of the other crap, because that's where we get stuck. And I'm sorry about going off on this, but I just love this point so much, is that the difference between surviving and thriving. For me, surviving is we're focused on all the things that we don't want. Oh, I have to pay this bill. I have to do this. I have to go to this job that I don't like. And we're stuck in all these things that we don't really like. We're just surviving them. We're like just trying to get to shore so that we can breathe. Thriving is when we see something in the distance and we're like, I really want that. And we start running towards it. Now, that part is harder for us as human beings because survival is where our DNA is still. We haven't been able to evolve fast enough to get into thriving or, have our bodies adjust to all of the things that we have today. But thriving is where we want to be. And so those intentional words, I call those my intentions, bold, open, and love. That's what I really want. And so it gives me something to keep focusing on thriving side rather than getting stuck by all the bumps and the discomforts of everyday life and challenges. And so that's what I think has really changed my life is like I have this like North Star telling me where to focus my attention and energy.
That is amazing. Thank you so much for sharing those skills. And for those listening, if you haven't already shared this episode with someone you know, again, I invite you. That right there is a truth that someone is going to hear, that it's going to change their lives. It really, really will. Just like how Christina was talking about a book that could potentially change lives, those skills she just shared with you will change someone's life. So I invite you, please share them. Christina's message needs to be heard
Mm.
here. Next question for you, Miss Christina. The support groups you said you went and found them. Where did you find your support groups?
Um, so I was lucky that my husband was part of a men's group and they had a sister organization when I met him called Woman Within. So you can go to womanwithin.org. They're all over the world. And they have circles for women to sit in and be heard and seen without advice, without judgment, which is huge. When I went to my first Woman Within event, it was a weekend for women only. And when I showed up, there was like 60 women in the room. And I got to tell you, it was the first time I realized I didn't trust women. And I learned how to trust them. And today, those, Woman Within events are like my second home. I feel like I can be really authentic and who I am and accepted for who I am. And that was a huge piece. So any woman can go to womanwithin.org. And if you're a man, you can go to mkp.org. And there are circles for you to sit in and, skills trainings that you can go to that help you hold space for yourself and hold space for others. Get really clear on what's going on for you, especially in relationships with others. I mean, the skills that I've learned from there are pretty phenomenal. Of course, there's also therapy, right? You can always find your own therapist, but that's something that I think is available to everyone, and you can really take advantage. You don't have to pay anything to sit in a free open circle. You can just show up and be yourself. There are some guidelines. I like to call them encouraged behaviors. But like just not giving other people advice, because the whole idea behind Woman Within is that every woman has her own intelligence and her own knowing already, and that we're just there to help her bring out her own knowing. So we don't give advice. We really just hold space for that woman to go deeper within herself and start getting clear on what's going on for her.
That is amazing. Thank you so much. That's so cool. And then I've got one more question for you about
Yeah.
coping skills. You talked about you've gotten to this point where you're now developing tools for other people as a coach. What's one of your favorite tools that you've developed for your ladies?
Ooh, well, that intentional align method is excellent. I make all of my clients do it when they first start with me because and we check in with them every week. Every week, if it was somebody else's intentions, I'd be like, "Oh, okay, Christina. So how is bold, open, and love going for you?" And they'll talk about it, and then that keeps them focused on it all of the time. And I mean, there's some clients where they did it for like a year or two, and they were like, they didn't really get it, but like it was year 2 or 3 where they were like, I'm starting to really get this. Like, this is what I want to show up as. This is how I really want to be in life. And so it's really amazing because they can really self-validate, which is the huge part for me is I just want them to stop asking other people how they're doing in life and start tuning in and going, how am I doing in life? So it's that tool. And I also talk a lot about archetypes, which is, very Carl Jung psychologist kind of thinking. We talk a lot about archetypes because I'm sure it happens for men too, but I know women specifically that we have lots of voices in our head telling us to do lots of things. I want to take off early, right? My adolescent's like, let's just be done at 3 p.m. instead of 5 p.m. And my warrior's like, no, we got projects to do. Let's work till 7 p.m. And then my lover's like, I really want to spend time with my family. So all of those voices and just understanding, especially when we're sitting in our wounded selves, which is where I sat for a really long time. I sat in that wounded child area. And just one clue for other people, when you're sitting in your wounded child, you can tell because everything is awful. And I know that we've all had those days where it's like one thing is bad, but then all of a sudden we're like, oh, and this thing in my marriage. Oh, and this thing in this relationship or this friendship. Oh, and it's at work and it's here and it's there. And it's like we get to that point where we feel powerless. And like my inner child wants to just light a match and watch it all burn. That's how I know I'm in my wounded child. And when we're there, it's almost impossible to step into our empowered space without acknowledging, hey, look, yeah, I hear you're feeling overwhelmed today. This is a lot. We might have to go slower today. And really just checking in with that tender part of ourselves. Like, what is going on? Am I sad? Am I angry? What's happening? And I think that that's something that we just don't do enough. So, yeah, I talk about archetypes and intentions, and that's really the two core pieces of my coaching.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. Those are some really cool tools, and I'm excited to talk about those a little bit more. I've got a few more questions I want to get to
Sure.
though, and then I would love to open it up about your coaching so you can pitch yourself and plug yourself there. So appreciation for the journey. Miss
Mm.
Christina, looking back at all of the hard things you've
Mhm.
had to go through, all of the journeys, all of the trials, all of the experiences, looking back, what can you appreciate about everything you've been through?
Whew, all of it. Like, I mean, it was so long that I was just like, why is all this happening? Why can't I like live a quote unquote normal life, whatever that is, right? Like, because it always looks so easy from the outside. When I'm looking at other people, I'm like, look at all their lives are turning out great. What's wrong with me? But appreciation for the journey. I was just talking about archetypes, and a few weeks ago, I was staffing a women's weekend, and we do this visualization with our wise crone, our elder, wise elder, and our inner child. And it was the first time that my inner child came up to me and was just like happy and laughing and skipping. And she was just like, she really, I'm going to try to do it without tearing up, but she looked at me and she was just like, you did it. Like, you have the life that we wanted. You have a community of women that love you. You have, no matter how much of a nomad I am, there's this woman within community in every region. So I always have women around me that have the same rules and guidelines of sitting in circle, and that feels really safe. And so yeah, there's huge appreciation, especially from my inner child who always showed up really abused and sad and angry for a really long time. And now just to see that part of me reflecting and going, wow, you got it. You got the life that we wanted. That was amazing. Like that was even better than we had imagined. Like we just wanted it not to be angry at home. We just wanted it to be safe. A place that I wanted to go was home, and she is just really thrilled. So, just for that piece, I mean, just for the appreciation of having that wounded child become so healed and so happy. I mean, I can't imagine a better feeling than that. That's probably the best appreciation I've had for my journey, the entire, even in the last 15 years. Yeah, it was pretty amazing.
Thank you so much. What a heartfelt experience, and thank you so much for your willingness to share it with me and our listeners here. That's awesome. So, my last question for you, advice for others, for those people just getting into the realm of mental health and learning about it, what advice do you have for those people?
Yeah, sit among women or men, whatever it is. There's co-gender or all gender circles as well. But sitting with other people and learning that we're all trying to figure out this humanness, I think is really important. I actually sign all of my emails that just say, it says, be gentle with your humanness. Because I think that we so forget that we're human and not robots, especially like we're not something that you can just program. I love when Maya Angelou says, when you know better, you do better. Not true. Not always true. And, you know, we can't help it. We have old defaults. So, it wasn't overnight where my inner child or even myself looked at my life and was like, oh, that's the time it got better. it's so many layers to healing that you have to kind of peel off. They always talk about the onion, you have to peel off all of these layers. And just when you think, oh, it's all great, something else will show up and you'll be like, oh, that's another version of that wound. Like that's that wound coming up just with a different face again. And so learning to be gentle with ourselves and that, you know, when we know better, we're going to do our best to do better. How about that?
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah.
And thank you for coming on the show today, Christina, and just sharing your vulnerable, heartfelt story, some beautiful lessons and experience. I know that I feel so energized because of this conversation, and I know other people are going to feel as well. So thank you so much. People I know at this point are listening to the show and they're thinking, wow, I need to work with Christina,
Ah,
right? How can they get in contact with you?
yeah, they can go to my website, christina-smith.com. I'm on Instagram and Facebook as well. But you can definitely go to christina-smith.com/toolkit. And there's a confidence toolkit. Now, it does say midlife confidence toolkit. However, anybody can use the tools that are in there, and some of them, come out of that intentional and aligned method that I had talked about. But there's tools there to help us start getting confident, to self-validate, to start. For me, confidence is really about self-trust, trusting myself. And I know that we all say that we trust ourselves, but I'm gonna bet that we don't all trust ourselves. We say we do when we're making decisions or whatever, but when we're making changes or transformations, it can be really hard to trust that if I do something different than I've always done it, that it's gonna be okay. And that's really what I want to help women do is see that living the life that they really, really desire, whether they know what that is or not, is a bit easier than we make it out to be. It can look big and scary, but it's just one step and one step and one layer at a time.
I love that. Thank you so much. And all of those links I will make sure to put into the description of this show. So you will have access to all those, and everyone here. If you just go down and look in the comment section or the description section, you'll see those as well. So, Christina, again, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I truly, truly appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me. It's always great to be heard and seen, that's for sure.
Always a great feeling.
Yeah.
And for those who listen to the show, if you haven't already, please make sure to share it with one of your friends. Also, make sure to like and subscribe to whatever platform you choose to listen to the show on. It definitely helps me and it helps the Wellness Center tribe get out there so more people can be blessed with the episodes that we're releasing daily. If you do want to come on to my show, I would love to have you on. Please understand that no story is too big and no name is too small. If you do have a story, I want to share it all. Please contact me at chase@thewellnesscenter.life. If you want to know more about what I do on a day-to-day basis, visit www.thewellnesscenter.life, where red light therapy rejuvenates every cell in your body one session at a time. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll see you guys on the flip side. Peace out.